Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, the podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters. With your questers, Josh and Dan, I am Dan.
I am Josh.
And on today's podcast, we will be discussing all things horrifical, again, because we're doing more horrors, because we have a list of horrors to get through, and they're fun to talk about. So if you have any questions for us about anything you're going to hear tonight, please contact us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. I think first up, Giftbringer.
Yes. I have referred to the Stephen King horror in the past. This is him.
I was going to say, Joy gave me that idea of turning something you hate into needing pain and so forth and so on. And Josh said, there's one later on we're going to get to that actually is the Needful Things horror. You are correct. This is Giftbringer.
Yes.
This is the one.
Giftbringer is almost certainly inspired by Needful Things, the Stephen King novel.
Yeah.
Between recording, I actually went into the other room where I have a copy of Needful Things because I have a very nearly complete collection in hardcover of Stephen King's novels because, of course, I do. And it was originally published in 1991, so it had actually not been out that long when Earthdawn was being worked on, and so could very, very easily be inspiration. The similarity, if you have read Needful Things, and as we talk about Giftbringer, you'll go, oh yeah, this all sounds really familiar.
I read Needful Things in 3 days.
I have not read it in a while, but it's a good one.
I read 250 pages a day. I read it in 3 days. I had a very boring job that allowed me to read while on the job. I worked in a toll booth that went for 5 miles. We didn't have a lot of traffic. It was brand new. So I sat there and read books all day, every day. And I read Needful Things in 3 days. No lie. Anyway, yes. So I read it. Fantastic book. The movie's okay. The casting's great, but it's like all Stephen King adaptations. Let's not go down that road. Anyway, this is welcome to Giftbringer. This is written by a victim/survivor of Giftbringer when Giftbringer came to town. The victim survivor admits to killing one of his neighbors, but feels really bad about it, as you should. Giftbringer this is where the Stephen King part comes in, feeds off of your aggression and your violence. But to get the aggression and the violence to kick in, he kindles that with jealousy turned into rage about belongings and gifts and things that should be yours that aren't yours.
Yep. That's basically it. Giftbringer has significant illusion powers.
Mm-hmm.
It will come into a community, a smaller one, isolated frequently, appearing as a traveling peddler or merchant of some sort who will come into town and will just have a bunch of stuff for sale and basically sells them to people.
Yeah.
And these things that he sells people are something that they didn't realize that they wanted, but when they see it, they have to have it. Mm-hmm. And then gradually, the more it gets its hooks into a community by distributing these things, it manipulates the desires of other members of the community to want that thing as well, to the point where people will start, in the extreme, like killing each other to gain possession of the thing.
Yeah, because it's amazing. When you go into the shop, the thing you're looking for is right behind you. And then, of course, you acquire that thing. And as soon as you leave the shop, you're like, well, this isn't really what I wanted, but I guess I should hold on to it. Because Giftbringer also tells you, oh, but the thing you really wanted, yeah, so-and-so down the block has it, but he'll return it soon. And so you have to wait now. And then after a couple of days go by, you go back to the shop. And finally, you're going back to the shop like every day, if not twice a day or 3 times a day or every hour. Where's my thing? Where's my thing? Where's my thing? And then finally, Giftbringer says, well, they just haven't returned it. And I don't know why they haven't returned it. They should have. So you should go ask for it. And then, of course, by that point, you are so amped up on getting this thing that you know you should possibly have that it just is going to come to blows if you don't get it.
The tensions and the jealousies and the desire bubble over and boil over to the point where people start abusing and injuring and killing each other also in the earlier stages of it, they are so wrapped up in their desire and interest in the things that they have that they will neglect their regular duties or be short-tempered or whatever with other people because they're being distracted from things. There's really kind of like a dark mirror of Chorrolis aspect, really. If you think about the possessiveness and the desire to own things or own something in particular, this is a horror that could be very interesting as a contrast to Chorrolis.
Yeah.
And then once things really start going bad, the horror then takes off. In a lot of cases, it will see the community destroyed, ultimately. But if it gets revealed before it's able to completely do that, then it will sort of reveal its true form and take off into the sky because it can fly.
Yeah.
And leaves the community behind.
It arrives in town, usually often disguised as a human male, always very charismatic. Its true appearance, however, I got from the book, a shiny, slick skin, stretched out on the ends of arms turned into wings. So, a bat, as far as I can tell there. Sharp bones jutting up against very taut skin. The head is elongated with a shiny black beak and very green eyes. So this tells me it's kind of like part bat arm and wings with a crow's beak on an emaciated human body. Legs are longer than usual by like 1.5 times or so, with clawed feet. So, yeah, okay.
Kind of like pterodactyl-y wyvern.
Yeah.
There's a Larry McDougall image of it in the book, erupting out of the roof of a building. It's got this kind of curved arc and these webbed wings and this big. It's on page 35 of the horrors book.
Oh yeah, that one. For whatever reason I looked right through it. But Giftbringer does favor small towns with fewer residents so as not to be discovered quickly, because it's trying to get all of this to come to a bubble, come to a boil, come to a head, so that all the tension can be maximized as possible. And it uses illusions because it cannot change physical form. So it always looks like that, but it uses illusion magic to cover up exactly how it looks. So when it shows up as the human male in town, most of the time, sometimes it's other male, it always looks just a little off if the illusion magic is working. And it 9 times out of 10 almost always works. But if it does come down to blows, Giftbringer relishes physical combat. So it's not afraid to get into a scrap, and it uses its illusion spells plentifully during that scrap. So careful what you bring to the fight, because Giftbringer is ready for you.
Yeah. This is a subtle, patient horror.
Yeah.
It's one of those that comes in and works slowly and somewhat behind the scenes and tries not to draw attention to itself. The comparisons to Joy are not unfounded. Yeah. There is a very similar kind of approach where they both like isolated communities and they both manipulate things within the community to make things wrong. It's just that Giftbringer operates through these presents, through these items that it sells, whereas Joy just manipulates people's emotional feedback loops.
Fair. Once Giftbringer does leave the community, if there are any survivors, good luck. If, then all of those trinkets and all of those items and all of those things that you just had to acquire are pale imitations of what you were actually looking for, usually broken, decrepit, aged.
They had been masked by illusion magic.
Oh, totally. So yeah, this is 9/10 of Giftbringer is illusion. And the other 10th is, of course, subtle, insidious manipulation to the nth degree, feeding upon your jealousy and making that foment into rage. And then, once you've hit that long fuse and it's over with, aggression, violence, and, go to town. So the powers that it has, it of course has horror. So what it does first is this Clarion call spell.
Which is an illusionist spell.
Yeah. So this Clarion call gets you to come into the shop, gets you to want those items. And then it uses its gifts power, which is unique to Giftbringer. And that's what those illusions are, those little tiny trinkets and baubles and things that you want and need. Then it horror marks you. And then what it does to really feed off of you is it uses its karma tap. So that's the 4-step process for how Giftbringer works his ways and means upon the victims. Clarion call, gifts power, horror mark, karma tap. And so it would gradually just suck all that out of you. It's a really nice way to get that done. So if Needful Things was the inspiration, the mechanics behind what Earthdawn did to make that work, it's fantastic.
Yeah. It is not afraid to get into a scrap if it comes to that. It is a physically potent horror.
Yeah.
In the first edition book, its base attributes are upper teens, low 20s. Its defense ratings are 20 physical, 20 mystic, spell defense in first edition, 19 social.
Yeah.
27 physical armor, 30 mystic armor.
I think that pales in comparison to the movement rates. Those are insane.
Oh, yeah. Its movement rate, and this is first edition, so things are
skewed.
Pretty bananas. But in its human form, in its name giver form, its combat move is 125 and its full move is 250. That's yards per round. So it is fast. And the flying rate, 170, 340. It is fast.
That is the Flash for Earthdawn. I mean, that is just screaming fast.
That's faster than an elf maxed out for speed in first edition.
Yeah. That is
an elf in first edition, I think his full move could be up to like 105 or 110.
Mm-hmm.
So it's significantly faster than that.
Yeah.
It's got a death rating of 170, a wound threshold of 40, an attack step of 24, and a damage step of 25. I would assume that would be like with its clawed talons and whatnot.
Yeah, totally.
It's got 7 spell actions per round.
Oh!
And spell actions are used both to weave threads and to cast spells.
Yeah.
With a spell casting step of 21 and an effect of 23, it's got 65 karma points with a karma step of 14.
Yeah, it ain't no slouch.
On top of the other powers that you mentioned, it's got terror and Circle 7 illusionist spells. It is a beefy boy. It is a nasty, nasty creature.
Giftbringer can bring it as far as a fight is concerned.
The one advantage, if you can call it that, with Giftbringer is that, unlike some of the other horrors that we've talked about, like Joy, where the victims of the horror will act to protect it, that doesn't happen with the victims of Giftbringer.
Yeah.
They are too busy killing each other if it gets to that point to get in the way. In some senses, Giftbringer is kind of a stereotypical horror. It manipulates a small community and causes them to all turn on each other. But the cool thing about Giftbringer in one sense is how it is so obviously an homage to Needful Things that it shows how you can take inspiration from existing tropes and horror genre ideas and find a way to convert them into the paradigm and setting of Earthdawn.
Totally take external material and adapt it.
Oh, yeah.
All the time.
This is like the most blatant, quote-unquote, rip-off of all of the horrors in the book. You can very clearly point to the source of the sort of kernel of the idea that this came from, because what this horror does is more or less the same thing that what's-his-name does in Needful Things.
The actor is Max von Sydow. I don't remember the character's name anymore. I had it.
I don't remember either.
A while ago. Anyway.
It is not a horror that is going to be one that targets player characters. They are going to be coming upon a situation where the horror either has recently acted or maybe starting to become involved. The goal is for the player characters to unravel that mystery and act against it. And you can make it a longer term campaign opponent by having the characters come across places where it has already done its work, and they're kind of dealing with the aftermath or tracking it down or something like that. Because the horror pretty much always operates the same way, it becomes a matter of tracking down where it is in order to try and stop it. Its high speed and ability to fly does mean that it is able to escape if things are turning against it.
Yeah.
In a physical conflict, it is able to escape reasonably well. It is a physical horror. It looks different on the astral plane. There is a description of, if it's in its natural form, what you see if you're examining it astrally, but it doesn't really have the ability to cross over it or escape into astral space.
Yeah.
This is a situation where you can have it sort of be a recurring antagonist or a recurring problem that the player characters deal with and need to track down and kind of try and put a stop to it. In a way, it is a classic horror in the way that it would kind of be part of a story arc. It is not one that is likely to be targeting player characters specifically, although you could certainly have them get caught up in the gifts situation that it operates with. But it is just as easy to not have the player characters be targeted by that specifically and just find themselves either in a community that is erupting into violence as a result of this, or tracking down the horror through reports of places where this has happened and trying to put a stop to it.
Totally. We have some very straightforward horrors in this series that we're doing, and some more insidious, underhanded, behind-the-scenes horrors. This is kind of both.
Yeah.
It operates incredibly straightforward, but it's also insidious and behind the scenes. So it's a nice blending.
I mean, in terms of its tactics, it is straightforward and pretty simple in that regard. It's just that its tactics are subtle and patient and slow to work.
Like the rest of the horrors.
Once it's got its claws into the community, once it's spread all the gasoline, then it lights the match. And then just lets everything burn and drinks up the lovely feelings that are generated as a result.
Absolutely.
If I'm recalling correctly, in the novel, even the end of the novel Needful Things has the shopkeeper changing forms and vanishing, like escaping because he was uncovered. Yeah. This is such a wonderful homage and everything that it's just
You're not
great.
wrong. He takes off, takes flight, and leaves him like a ghastly a gothic chariot or something along those lines, and just takes off into the air and goes away. So So I like the uses for Giftbringer as well. It's got like 3 little paragraphs on how to throw Giftbringer into an adventure in like 3 different ways. You could happen upon him, and it could be a recurring character, recurring horror if you want to. Because again, if you fight him, he's going to bring it. So make sure you bring your A game and have preparation in mind, because Giftbringer should be hard to take down.
Mm-hmm. It is definitely a higher powered opponent.
Yeah.
By the raw numbers, it will be a difficult opponent to take down, especially once you factor in its magical abilities and its karma and all of the other stuff. It's high
step numbers,
defenses, and everything else.
I always look at the wound threshold first and go, I have to do a 40 before I actually do any damage. So start there, everybody.
It's got a mystic armor of 30 and a physical armor of 27. So you need to be doing a lot of damage to actually damage it. And then your odds of actually doing a wound to it are pretty small until you get talents like critical hit and things like that are going to be boosting your damage significantly.
Yeah.
But then it's got 170 death rating, so it takes quite a bit to get through all of that.
You're going to have a fun time chinking away at its armor. So,
actually, to go back to something that I was talking about last week, somebody had the question about the action economy, and I was talking about how it can be difficult to have a single big boss that ends up being a worthy challenge without having the numbers being out of reach, because there's only so many actions they can take. Looking at the fact that Giftbringer has 2 physical attacks and 7 spells, it can actually be targeting multiple characters on its turn each round. and spreading out its aggression as opposed to only having one or two actions, which means that it can't do a lot to other people.
Agreed. In that case, I would just do, if I had like a 5 or 6 person party, I'd just have Giftbringer go every other turn. Every other action it possibly could. I'd spread those out.
Yeah. With a large number of actions like that, that is certainly something that you could do. Morgan has sort of been working on a legendary mask, which is one that sort of gives the creature or enemy actions that it can take outside of its turn in order to give it more actions to stand up against the action economy of a full group. Nice. I don't know if that's actually appeared in a book. It might be on his site. I know it sort of appeared on a couple of enemies, and I think they're on Panda Gaming Grove.
Fair. Yeah. It'll reach the light of day eventually. So I think I like Giftbringer. Not my favorite, but I liked Giftbringer, as you said, a well-done homage to the source material and a nice adaptation.
And to the master of horror himself.
Oh, of course. You have to. If you're gonna steal from the best. And we did. Or they did. So on to Ubyr. You want to get started? Because you
Ubyr, I like to refer to as the kaiju horror.
I don't have a problem with that.
Because Ubyr is aquatic, primarily. Yeah. It hunts and haunts the Serpent River network. But it is huge.
Yeah.
It is a monstrous entity.
And I think also one of the cooler sets of powers I've come across in a horror. So to your point, yeah, Ubyr is a long serpentine body whose body is scaled like an eel. So it's got a flat, featureless head and a tooth-lined circular maw, kind of like a leech. So head of a leech.
Sandworm from Dune.
There you go. Nice. Especially since there's been...
Not quite that big.
Not quite. That's the general idea.
That's the general idea.
Yeah.
It's a big, giant, sea serpent-y kind of like worm thing.
Oh, yeah. It's essentially, to put Josh's point, kaiju, gargantuan large. Big McLarge huge. It is 400 yards long, and it can stretch itself up to 700 yards long, which is almost a quarter of a mile in its short form, and more than a quarter of a mile in its long form. Just to give everybody what that kind of looks like, because that's 2,100 feet. That's a big horror. It does have a couple of defenses, and I like them. One of which is it has boiling acid blood, which is corrosive, and armor does not help in any way, shape, or form. It's step 15, corrosive on its own. It's step 20 when it's in water.
Which it often is.
Yes. So that makes it even nastier when you're around that. Ubyr feeds on blood and, of course, life essence, which, of course, is blood. I'm kidding. What it can do, it can drain all the blood from a victim in about 2 rounds. So if you get caught by Ubyr, you're not going to make it through unless you have 1 round to get away from it. And it can also sense beings within 30 feet of any part of its body. Remember, quarter mile long, that's a long body.
It is actually blind.
Yes.
Like a worm, in a sense, but it can sense things that are around it, unless there is a solid object between Ubyr and the individual.
Yeah, a wall.
So you can sort of hide behind a wall from it. While it is mainly aquatic, it can move on land as easily as it does in the water. It just prefers the water.
Because it's easier to hide there.
It does primarily haunt the Serpent River. It is responsible for the destruction of many Tiskrang village cares, and any other sort of cares that were citadels, especially, that were built on the shores of or near the Serpent River.
Yeah.
Because what it really does, and while it is a big, monstrous, destructive kaiju horror, its special thing is if it can completely envelop a structure, wrap its body around it and get over the top, it can use its siphon will power.
Yeah.
Which allows it to drain the life force of any victim that is within that structure that it has surrounded.
Yeah. And I like the mechanics they put behind that siphon willpower, which is it sucks basically each individual inside the encircled building loses a point from every attribute value each minute. So let's say you've got an attribute value of 15 in strength and in your willpower and so forth and so on. So basically you lose 1 point of that every minute. So you got 15 minutes, if that's what your attribute values are. Could be 16, could be 14, who knows? When any of those attribute values reach 0, you are dead. So if you've got 11s, 12s, 13s, you're shorter for this world if Ubyr is wrapped around your building.
If you do manage to escape, then each recovery test will restore 1 point. So it takes a long time to recover.
Yeah.
Because your associated steps and whatnot are also reduced as your attributes go down.
Naturally.
That power doesn't actually do damage, but it just basically is sort of draining the life essence out of you.
Yeah. And it makes you, I love the mathematics that make you weaker because of that. So yeah, if your attributes values come down, your steps come down, and then everything else you can do is based upon those attribute values and steps, you're just not going to be as effective. So you got to get away quick, regroup, and then do something else. And I love the fact that the essay was written by a survivor like 2 days before he got into the cares for the Scourge. And so this is how old Ubyr is that obviously pre-Scourge, probably still here, because why not? And, hiding out in or asleep at the bottom of a river somewhere, but it's serpentine and it's a worm, so it can easily bend where the river bends and stay deep in the water because it doesn't care.
It doesn't have a lot of powers. Siphon Will is really the big one.
Yeah.
It's got Horror Mark, but it can only use its Horror Mark to track victims that have escaped it.
Yeah.
So if a victim is able to free itself, then there's a test to see if Ubyr can detect them, and if so, then it can attempt to Horror Mark him. And once it does, then it knows where the target is up to 100 miles away.
Yeah.
And it will attempt to track down and finish off the victim.
Unrelenting in tracking down anybody who escapes it.
No test is required. Once you are marked, the only real way to escape it is to get out of its range.
Yeah. And how fast can you run 100 miles?
It also has a pretty high movement rate, not as high as Giftbringer, but its full movement is 150 yards per round in first edition terms.
Yeah.
It's also got a pretty significant karma step.
Yep.
Pretty decent
armor
defense ratings. So it's got the Horror Mark power I mentioned, it's got Siphon Will, and then it also has Terror.
Yeah.
Because everything's better with Terror. But this is a much more physically imposing and intimidating horror.
Yeah, this is beefy.
That can kill entire populations relatively quickly through the use of its signature power.
Yeah.
And it is a horror that, while it doesn't actually have a lot of attacks, because of its corrosive blood, attacking hurts you.
Kind of like a xenomorph.
Yeah, so I mean, it is a big, nasty, dangerous entity.
As it should be.
It's a kaiju horror.
Yeah.
Outside of possibly Vergigorm, it is the largest horror that I am aware of.
Yeah, that works for me.
Again, 400 yards is a third of a mile, or just shy of a third of a mile.
Yeah. It's a big one.
It is a big one. Oh, and the individuals that it kills through its Siphon will either replenish its karma or heal its damage.
Yes. So if you've got it backpedaling, if it's on the rebound, it'll just kill a whole bunch of people nearby, siphon their life force in a few minutes, and replenish itself and be back to fully healed. So, like Giftbringer at the beginning of the episode, Ubyr can bring it in a fight. And so you better bring your A game and your most powerful spells and your legendary weapons and all your karma, because this is no slouch. We're getting up there in the horror powers and the durability.
There are a couple of sort of different ways that you can bring Ubyr into play. One of them is sort of coming across the results of its action. A community ends up dead. It comes out and they take shelter in their theoretically reinforced main central communal building or whatever, and it just wraps itself around there and drains them all dry.
Yeah.
It's possible, like it could wrap itself around a riverboat and kill the crew that way, like a ghost ship kind of situation where a vessel appears with all of the crew dead with no apparent signs of struggle or injury on them. They've just all had their life force drained. One of the hooks that's in the entry talks about a care that fell and was sort of sealed up, but things are starting to be seen around there. Are they the restless spirits of the ones that died there and things like that, going with a kind of haunted house scenario where you're exploring this necropolis where a whole bunch of people died as a result of the actions of this horror. Another case of where you can have the horrors be a presence in the game in a sense without necessarily having it be there. That is a sort of adventure where you could have a lower circle party characters that, would not necessarily be able to take on Ubyr on their own, but can be investigating something that is connected to the aftermath of one of its attacks. And then, of course, there's always the joy of a campaign arc, perhaps involving an attack on the giant river worm, where they might even get riverboats, like descrying riverboats, to help with the attack on it, assaulting it with fire cannons and blasting it, and classic kaiju movie monster big battle of things. If you want to go into that kind of large scale situation, definitely something that high powered characters would potentially need to bring all of their skills to bear in order to survive.
Totally. Talk about action economy with a large scale fight like that. But that'd be fun.
Well, again, in this case, the action economy wouldn't be a huge problem because those characters who need to, say, go after it in close combat, it does not need to take actions to hurt them with its blood. And the acidic blood, if you're like in the river and you're attacking it from riverboats or whatever, it could do like smash attacks against those, or its acid blood could eat away at the hulls and cause damage to the ships, and a bunch of stuff that you could do like that.
Totally.
With this big nasty thing. And, potentially have that happening as it is threatening a care or community or something along those lines.
So it's just fun. I like that.
Another sort of big bruiser of a horror with not a lot of powers. It's just got its own special kind of hook, its own special power.
Yeah.
And the background helps kind of relate what sort of stories you are likely to run into with it. In a similar way with like Artificer. Again, another horror that in one sense is kind of simple and straightforward, but has a really interesting and clear hook involved.
Because sometimes you just need that. It's one of those, okay, so my characters are done with this and they're kind of burnt out on that aspect of the game. Bring in Ubyr just for shake things up a little bit. Remind them that, they occasionally get large.
I have been toying with the idea of an adventure that involves spawn of Ubyr, like smaller versions of them.
Nice.
Nothing more than this would be really cool. I need to come up with a scenario where it would make sense to use them.
Yeah.
It would be something that I would do in maybe a Gen Con game or whatnot, because obviously I wouldn't want to run a scenario where I'm using the full-blown horror because
that's a lot.
I would have newer players potentially and would not want to saddle them with the 8th, 9th, 10th circle characters that they would potentially need to play in order to have a chance against the thing.
Yeah. And a small chance at that. But that's me. Any questions that people may have about these horrors, please feel free to email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. If you've used Ubyr or Giftbringer, by all means, let us know how it went. We'd love to hear those stories as well. Until next time, bring a gift and beware the siphon will for your legend.
Good night, everybody.